The water dripped from her trembling fingers as she twisted the faded blue calico one more time, her pale skin turning red from the cold October wind that swept across the creek bank. And when she heard the horse approach, she gasped and clutched the soaked fabric to her chest. Nathan Vance had been tracking the horse thieves for 3 days straight when he spotted the smoke from what he assumed was their camp. But as he dismounted and crept through the cottonwoods along Boggy Creek, he realized the figure crouched by the water was alone, small, and most definitely not one of the men he was hunting. The woman's dark hair hung wet and tangled down her back, and she wore nothing but a thin chemise that clung to her shivering frame as she desperately wrung water from what appeared to be her only dress. Nathan's face burned hot despite the autumn chill, and he immediately turned his head away, fixing his gaze firmly on the trees. "Madam," he called out, keeping his voice steady and his eyes averted. "I'm going to build you a fire. Don't be frightened. I'm not here to hurt you." She spun around with a sharp intake of breath, clutching the wet dress tighter. "Please," her voice came out hoarse and frightened, "please don't come any closer." "I won't, madam. I give you my word." Nathan kept his back partially turned as he moved to gather fallen branches and dry wood from beneath the sheltering cottonwoods. His hands worked quickly, efficiently, the way his father had taught him years ago on the ranch outside Madisonville. "My name is Nathan Vance. I'm a ranch hand from the V-Bar Ranch, and I've been tracking some horse thieves through this territory. I'm going to get this fire going, and then I'll move back to give you privacy. You need to get warm before you catch your death." The woman said nothing, but he could hear her teeth chattering even from several yards away. Nathan worked faster, striking his flint against steel, until sparks caught in the dry grass and kindling he had arranged. He blew gently, coaxing the flame to life, then carefully added larger sticks until a proper fire crackled and popped in a cleared area safe from the surrounding brush. "There," he said, still keeping his gaze directed away from her. "Fire's ready for you. I'm going to walk back to my horse now. I've got a blanket in my bedroll you can use. I'll leave it on this log here and I'll be over by the trees. You take your time getting warm and dressed. Why are you helping me?" Her voice was stronger now, though still wary. Nathan paused, his back still turned. "Because you need help, madam." "That's reason enough." He retrieved his thick wool blanket from his saddle, the one his mother had woven with her own hands before she passed, and he laid it carefully on a fallen log near the fire. Then he walked a good distance away, tending to his horse and checking his gear while keeping his position so his back was to the woman. The October sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. He had planned to make camp soon anyway, but he had not expected to find a woman alone and in such dire circumstances out here in the wilderness between Madisonville and Huntsville. After what felt like a long while, her voice called out tentatively, "You can turn around now. I'm decent." Nathan turned slowly and saw her sitting close to the fire, wrapped in his blanket with her blue calico dress spread on rocks near the flames to dry. Her face was pale and thin, with high cheekbones and large brown eyes that watched him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She looked young, maybe 22 or 23, and there was a bruise purpling along her jawline that made Nathan's hands clench into fists. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "Do you need medical attention?" She shook her head quickly. "No." "Well, nothing that won't heal on its own." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "My name is Abigail Allen. I was traveling with my husband to his brother's farm near Huntsville when our wagon broke an axle about 5 miles back. He went to find help, and that was yesterday morning. He never came back." Nathan's jaw tightened. A man who would leave his wife alone in the wilderness overnight was no man at all in his estimation. "Did something happen to your dress, Miss Abigail?" "Mrs." she corrected quietly, though there was something hollow in the correction. "I was trying to wash it in the creek. It was the only one I had left that was still clean, and I thought James would be back quickly. Then I slipped on the rocks and fell in completely. The water is so cold this time of year." She looked down at her hands. "I must seem foolish to you." "No, madam. You seem like someone who's had a string of bad luck, that's all." Nathan crouched down and began building up the fire more, adding larger logs that would burn longer. "It's going to be dark soon. With your permission, I'll make camp here for the night. In the morning, I can ride out and look for your husband, or I can take you to Madisonville where you can get proper help." Abigail bit her lip, and Nathan saw tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I don't think he's coming back," she whispered. "I think he left me here on purpose." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Nathan had seen enough of life to know that some men were cowards and some were cruel, and occasionally a man was both. He stood up and moved back to his horse, giving Abigail space to compose herself while he retrieved his cooking supplies and food stores. "Well," he said carefully as he returned, "whatever his reasons or whereabouts, the fact remains that you're here now and you need help. I've got some salt pork and beans we can cook up for supper, and I've got an extra bedroll you can use tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out the next step." "I don't have any money to pay you," Abigail said softly. "James kept all our money, and he had it with him when he left." "I'm not asking for payment, madam. This is just what decent folks do for each other out here." Nathan began preparing their simple meal, setting his small pot over the fire and adding water from his canteen. "You're from back east, aren't you? I can hear it in your voice." Abigail nodded, watching the flames dance. "Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. I met James when he came there on business. He seemed so kind and attentive, and he promised me a good life out west where land was cheap and opportunity was everywhere." She laughed bitterly. "I was such a fool. Within a month of our wedding, he started drinking heavily. Within 2 months, he hit me for the first time. By the time we got to Texas, I realized I had made the worst mistake of my life." Nathan stirred the beans slowly, his face carefully neutral though anger simmered in his chest. "How long have you been married?" "6 months. It feels like 6 years. She pulled the blanket tighter. "My parents warned me not to marry him so quickly, but I was 22 and so sure I knew better than them. I wanted adventure. I wanted to see the West. I got my wish, I suppose, just not the way I imagined." The beans began to bubble, and Nathan added the salt pork he had sliced up. The smell of cooking food filled the air, and he noticed Abigail's eyes following every movement he made with the pot. "When did you last eat, madam?" "Yesterday morning. We had some stale biscuits left." Nathan's mouth pressed into a thin line. He had been raised to believe that a man's first duty was to protect and provide for his family. And the idea that this James fellow had abandoned his wife without food or proper shelter made him want to track the man down for reasons that had nothing to do with horse thieves. But that was not his business, he reminded himself. His business was making sure Abigail was safe and fed. When the food was ready, he served her a generous portion in his tin plate and gave her his only spoon, content to eat his own share directly from the pot with his knife. Abigail ate quickly at first, then seemed to force herself to slow down, as though remembering her manners. They ate in silence for a while, the crackling fire and the evening sounds of insects and birds filling the space between them. "You mentioned you were tracking horse thieves," Abigail said finally, setting down the empty plate. "Is that your job?" "No, madam. I'm just a ranch hand on the V-Bar Ranch outside Madisonville. But 3 days ago, A group of thieves hit our ranch and made off with 6 of our best horses, including a pregnant mare that Mr. Vernon was counting on for his breeding program. The boss asked for volunteers to track them, and I've done enough hunting and tracking over the years that I said I would go. He poked at the fire with a stick. I tracked them this far, but I lost their trail yesterday when they crossed the creek. They're clever, whoever they are. They know how to cover their tracks. And you came out here alone. Isn't that dangerous? Nathan shrugged. I suppose it is, but sometimes dangerous things need doing anyway. Besides, I've been taking care of myself since I was 15. I know how to handle trouble when it comes. 15 seems young to be on your own. My pa died when I was 14 and my ma passed the following year. I had 2 younger sisters, but they went to live with our aunt in Houston. I was old enough to work, so I signed on with the V-Bar and I've been there ever since. He smiled slightly. That was 9 years ago now. Mr. Vernon is a good man and a fair boss. He treats his hands well. Abigail studied him across the fire, and Nathan felt suddenly self-conscious under her gaze. He was not a vain man, but he knew he was not unpleasant to look at, with his dark hair and blue eyes and the lean, muscular build that came from years of ranch work. He had been told by more than one saloon girl in Madisonville that he was handsome, but he had never paid much attention to such things. He had always been too focused on work and responsibility to think much about romance or courting. You're 24 then, Abigail said. The same age as me. You're 24. I thought you said you were 22 when you married. I am 24 now. I was 23 when I married 6 months ago. She colored slightly. I misspoke earlier. I was so cold and frightened I was not thinking clearly. Nathan nodded, accepting the explanation. Numbers and dates could get muddled when someone was in distress. Well, we're the same age then, though I reckon we've lived pretty different lives up until now. I imagine so. I grew up in a comfortable house in Philadelphia with servants and regular meals and a warm bed every night. I never had to worry about money or safety or where my next meal would come from. And then I threw it all away for a man I barely knew. Abigail's voice cracked. My parents were right about everything, and now I'll never be able to tell them so. I'm too ashamed to even write to them. You've got nothing to be ashamed of, madam. You made a choice that seemed right at the time with the information you had. We all do that. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it does not. Nathan stood up and moved to his saddlebags, pulling out his extra bedroll. Here, you should get some rest. We'll have a long day tomorrow no matter what we decide to do. He laid out the bedroll on the opposite side of the fire from where he would sleep, positioning it close enough to the flames that she would stay warm through the night. Abigail watched him with those large, dark eyes, and he could see 1,000 unspoken questions in her expression. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked finally. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything." Nathan considered the question as he settled onto his own bedroll, using his saddle as a pillow. "I suppose I could ask why you're trusting me. For all you know, I could be far worse than your husband. But you're not. I can tell." Abigail lay down and pulled his mother's blanket up to her chin. "You won't even look at me when you think it might not be proper. You gave me your only blanket and your food and your bedroll. You're not like James at all." "I'm just doing what my parents taught me was right, madam. Nothing more than that." Nathan looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Now get some rest. I'll keep watch and make sure the fire stays going. You need to sleep too." "I'll sleep some. I'm used to taking watch. Don't worry about me." Abigail was quiet for a long moment, and Nathan thought she might have fallen asleep, but then her voice came soft across the fire. "Thank you, Nathan. I mean it. Thank you for your kindness." "You're welcome, Abigail." He said her name for the first time without the formal address. and it felt strange on his tongue, intimate in a way that made his chest feel tight. He told himself it was just because she was a married woman, and he should not be thinking of her as anything other than someone who needed help. But there was something about her that drew him in despite his better judgment. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes, or the strength he could see beneath the fear, or the way she had not broken down completely, despite being abandoned in the wilderness. Whatever it was, Nathan knew he was in dangerous territory, and it had nothing to do with horse thieves or the wild Texas landscape. The night passed slowly, with Nathan adding wood to the fire every hour or so to keep it burning strong. He did sleep some, the light dozing of a man accustomed to staying alert even while resting, and each time he woke, he checked to make sure Abigail was still safely asleep across from him. She tossed and turned sometimes, murmuring words he could not make out, and once she cried out in what sounded like fear before settling back into silence. Nathan wondered what nightmares haunted her dreams and wished he could do something to ease them. When dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Nathan rose quietly and built up the fire again, then set about making coffee and frying some bacon he had brought with him. The smell of cooking meat woke Abigail, and she sat up slowly, pushing her dark hair back from her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Morning. Your dress should be dry by now. I checked it earlier and it seemed ready." Nathan kept his attention on the coffee pot. "I thought we could have some breakfast and then we should talk about what comes next." Abigail retrieved her dress, and Nathan turned away while she changed behind a tree, trading his blanket for her own clothing. When she returned to the fire, she looked more composed, though the dress hung loosely on her thin frame and he could see it had been patched in several places. He handed her a cup of coffee and a piece of bacon wrapped in a leftover biscuit, and they ate together as the sun climbed higher. The morning was cool but promised to warm up as the day went on, the October weather in Texas being unpredictable and changeable. "I've been thinking," Nathan said finally, setting down his empty cup. "I can take you into Madisonville. It's about 10 miles west of here. There's a boarding house there run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, and she's always looking for help. She might be willing to give you a room in exchange for work until you can figure out what you want to do next." Abigail wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "What about your horse thieves? They're long gone by now anyway. I lost their trail and I'm not likely to pick it up again." "Mr. Vernon will understand." Nathan stood up and began packing his gear. "Besides, getting you somewhere safe is more important than some horses. Even a pregnant mare worth a lot of money." He paused and looked at her directly. "Yes, madam, even that." Something shifted in Abigail's expression, a softening around her eyes and mouth. "I don't want to be the reason you fail in your responsibility to your employer. You're not. I'm making a choice, just like you said you did when you married your husband. I'm choosing to help you because it's the right thing to do." Nathan finished packing and turned to his horse, checking the saddle and tack. "Now, I'm afraid you'll have to ride with me since you don't have your own mount. It's not entirely proper, but there's no help for it given the circumstances." Abigail stood up, folding his blanket carefully. "I think we're past worrying about what's entirely proper, don't you? You've already seen me in my underclothes and spent the night alone with me in the wilderness. If anyone finds out, my reputation will be completely destroyed. Then we'll make sure no one finds out the details. As far as anyone in Madisonville needs to know, I found you after your wagon broke down and your husband went for help. You were fully dressed and perfectly decent, and I escorted you to town like any gentleman would. That's the truth, just without all the particular specifics." A small smile tugged at Abigail's lips, the first real smile he had seen from her. You're a good man, Nathan Vance. I hope you know that. Nathan felt heat rise in his face, and he busied himself with his saddlebags to cover his embarrassment. I'm just ordinary, madam. Nothing special about me. I disagree, but I won't argue with you about it. Abigail handed him the folded blanket. How do we do this? I've never ridden double on a horse before. Nathan secured his gear and then led his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, over to a fallen log. Step up on that log there and I'll mount up behind you. You'll ride in front of me and I'll handle the reins. All you have to do is sit steady and hold on. It took some maneuvering, and Nathan was acutely aware of how close they had to sit, his arms on either side of her to reach the reins, her back pressed against his chest. She smelled like wood smoke and creek water, and her hair tickled his chin whenever the breeze caught it. He tried not to think about how soft she felt or how right it seemed to have her there in his arms, protected and safe. She was a married woman, he reminded himself firmly. Married. It did not matter that her husband was a coward and a brute. It did not matter that Nathan could feel something growing in his chest every time he looked at her. None of it mattered because she belonged to someone else, at least in the eyes of the law and God. They rode west toward Madisonville at a steady pace, not hurrying but not dawdling either. The October sun warmed the air around them, and the landscape shifted from the thick cottonwoods along the creek to more open grassland dotted with oak trees. They passed a few farms and ranches, and once they saw a wagon in the distance, but they did not encounter anyone directly on the trail. "Tell me about Madisonville," Abigail said after they had been riding for a while. "What kind of town is it?" "It's small, maybe 300 people or so. We've got a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a schoolhouse, and a few other businesses. The railroad hasn't come through yet, though there's talk of it happening in the next few years. Most folks make their living from ranching or farming, and everyone knows everyone else's business." Nathan guided Copper around a large rock in the trail. "It's not fancy like Philadelphia, I imagine, but it's a good town with mostly good people. It sounds nice, quiet. It is that. Quiet can be good or bad depending on what you're looking for." He felt her shift slightly in the saddle, trying to find a more comfortable position. "You doing all right? We can stop and rest if you need to." "I'm fine. A little sore from sitting, but fine." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think James might come to Madisonville looking for me?" The question hung heavy between them. Nathan had been wondering the same thing, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Do you want him to?" "No." The word was immediate and certain. "No, I don't. I know I should. I know I made vows before God to stay with him for better or worse, but Nathan, I can't go back to him. I can't live like that anymore, always afraid, always walking on eggshells, never knowing when he'll get angry or violent. I can't do it." "Then you won't. No one is going to make you go back to him if you don't want to." Nathan spoke with more conviction than he felt, knowing that the law generally sided with husbands in such matters, but he would be damned if he would let anyone force Abigail back into a dangerous situation. "It's not that simple. I'm his wife. He has legal rights to me, rights that he abandoned when he left you alone in the wilderness without food or protection. If he comes looking, we'll deal with it then. But right now, let's just focus on getting you settled somewhere safe." Nathan tightened his arms slightly around her, a gesture of reassurance, and felt her relax back against him. They rode in comfortable silence for a while longer, and Nathan found himself noticing little things about her. The way she tilted her head to listen to birdsong, the graceful line of her neck, the small scar on her left hand that looked like an old burn. He wanted to know everything about her, wanted to hear all her stories and learn all her secrets, and the intensity of that want startled him. He had known her less than a day, And already she had burrowed into his thoughts like nothing and no one else ever had. Madisonville came into view around mid-morning, a cluster of wooden buildings spread along both sides of a wide dirt road. The church steeple rose above the other structures, white-painted and topped with a simple cross. A few people moved about their business on the street, and Nathan recognized several of them as he guided Copper down the main road toward the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson's establishment was a two-story white house with a wide porch and neat flower beds, even this late in the season. Nathan had been there a few times before, bringing supplies or messages from the V-Bar Ranch, and he knew the widow was a shrewd but fair woman who ran a respectable business. He dismounted first, then helped Abigail down, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her. She stumbled slightly when her feet hit the ground, stiff from the long ride, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Wait here a moment," he said. "Let me talk to Mrs. Patterson first." Nathan knocked on the door, and after a moment, it opened to reveal a sturdy woman in her 50s with iron gray hair pulled back in a bun and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "Nathan Vance," she said, her voice brisk but not unfriendly. "What brings you to town?" "Mr. Vernon send you on an errand?" "No, madam. I'm here about something else. Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes flicked past him to where Abigail stood by his horse, and her expression sharpened with interest. "I see. Come in, both of you." Nathan gestured for Abigail to join him, and they followed Mrs. Patterson into a neat parlor furnished with simple but well-made furniture. The widow waited until they were all seated before fixing Nathan with an expectant look. "This is Miss Abigail Allen," Nathan began, and saw Abigail start slightly at his use of Miss rather than Mrs. He continued smoothly. "Her wagon broke down out past Boggy Creek, and she's in need of room and board and possibly employment. I know you sometimes take on help here at the boarding house, and I thought you might have a place for her." Mrs. Patterson's shrewd eyes moved from Nathan to Abigail and back again. "I see. And where are you from, Miss Allen?" "Philadelphia, madam." "I came to Texas recently, and I'm afraid I find myself in reduced circumstances." Abigail's voice was steady, and Nathan admired her composure. "Philadelphia. That's a long way to come. What brought you to Texas?" "I was seeking a fresh start, madam." Sometimes people need to leave their old lives behind and begin again. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, and Nathan could see her mind working, weighing and calculating. "I do need help around here. I've got 6 boarders right now, and keeping up with the cooking and cleaning and laundry is getting to be too much for just me and my daughter. I can offer you a small room upstairs and 3 meals a day in exchange for work. No wages to start, but if you prove yourself reliable, we can discuss payment after a month. Does that seem fair?" Abigail's relief was visible. "Yes, madam. That seems more than fair. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I work my help hard, and I expect punctuality and thoroughness. I run a respectable house, and I won't tolerate any behavior that might damage that reputation. That goes for my boarders and my help both." Mrs. Patterson stood up. "Nathan, you can bring Miss Allen's things in if she has any." "She doesn't, madam. She lost everything when her wagon broke down." Nathan stood as well. "I was thinking maybe the church might have some spare clothing or supplies they could give her to start with. I'll speak to Reverend Morris about it. In the meantime, I've got a few old dresses that might fit her with some alterations." Mrs. Patterson turned to Abigail. "Come with me, dear. I'll show you your room and we'll get you settled." Abigail followed the widow toward the stairs, then paused and looked back at Nathan. Their eyes met, and he saw gratitude and something else he could not quite name in her expression. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. You're welcome. I'll come by in a few days to check on you if that's all right with Mrs. Patterson." The widow waved a hand dismissively. "You can visit during normal calling hours like anyone else. I run a respectable house, as I said." Nathan watched Abigail disappear up the stairs, feeling an unexpected emptiness in his chest. He had only known her for less than a day, but already he missed her presence. He told himself he was being ridiculous, that he was just concerned for her welfare the way he would be for anyone in trouble, but he knew that was not entirely true. There was something special about Abigail Allen, something that called to him in a way he did not fully understand. He left the boarding house and rode Copper toward the V-Bar Ranch, knowing he would have to explain to Mr. Vernon why he had returned without the horses and without catching the thieves. The sun was high overhead now, and the day had turned warm, the kind of perfect October day that made Texas beautiful despite its harshness. The V-Bar Ranch sprawled across several hundred acres west of Madisonville, with a main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings all arranged around a central yard. Nathan had spent 9 years of his life here, and it was the closest thing to home he had known since his parents died. He rode up to the barn and unsaddled Copper, brushing him down and giving him feed and water before heading to the main house to report to Mr. Vernon. The ranch owner was in his office, a weathered man in his 60s with a full white beard and kind eyes. He looked up from his ledger as Nathan knocked on the open door. "Nathan, you're back earlier than I expected. What news?" Nathan removed his hat and stepped inside, choosing his words carefully. "I tracked the thieves as far as Boggy Creek, but I lost their trail when they crossed the water. They're experienced and they know how to cover their tracks. I'm sorry I couldn't do better, sir." Mr. Vernon studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Can't be helped, I suppose. I appreciate you trying. Those were good horses, but they're not worth getting yourself killed over." He paused. "Something else on your mind, son? You look troubled." Nathan hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "I found a woman in distress out by the creek. Her wagon had broken down and she was stranded. I brought her to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house in town. I hope that was all right, sir." "I know I was supposed to be tracking the thieves. You did the right thing. A man's got to help folks in trouble when he can." Mr. Vernon closed his ledger and leaned back in his chair. "This woman have a name, Abigail Allen. She's from Philadelphia originally. And she was alone out there. Her husband had gone for help when the wagon broke down, but he never returned. I found her the next day." Nathan met his employer's eyes steadily. Mr. Vernon was silent for a moment, and Nathan could see the older man piecing together what was not being said. "I see. Well, Mrs. Patterson will take good care of her, I'm sure. Now get yourself some rest and some food. You've been riding hard for days." "Thank you, sir." Nathan replaced his hat and turned to leave, but Mr. Vernon's voice stopped him. "Nathan, be careful. I can see something in your eyes when you talk about this woman. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but be careful. Complicated situations have a way of becoming more complicated if you're not mindful." "Yes, sir, I understand." Nathan left the office, his thoughts churning. Mr. Vernon was right, of course. The situation with Abigail was already complicated, and Nathan's growing feelings for her only made it more so. But he could not seem to help himself. Even now, he was thinking about when he could reasonably visit her at the boarding house, what excuses he could make to see her again. The next few days passed slowly for Nathan, filled with the usual ranch work of mending fences, tending cattle, and breaking a new horse that Mr. Vernon had recently purchased. He threw himself into the labor, trying to keep his mind occupied, but Abigail's face kept appearing in his thoughts, her dark eyes and sad smile haunting him. On the 4th day after bringing her to town, Nathan found a reason to ride into Madisonville. The ranch needed supplies from the general store, and he volunteered to go, earning an amused look from Mr. Vernon that suggested the older man saw right through him. Nathan did not care. He needed to see Abigail, to know she was all right, to hear her voice again. He completed his errands at the general store first, loading his purchases into his saddlebags, then made his way to the boarding house. It was mid-afternoon, a respectable time for calling, and he knocked on the door with his heart beating faster than it should have been. Abigail herself answered the door, and Nathan felt his breath catch at the sight of her. She was wearing a different dress now, a plain gray cotton that was too big for her but had been pinned and belted to fit better. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and there was more color in her cheeks than there had been when he found her by the creek. She looked healthier, stronger, and achingly beautiful. "Nathan," she said, and her whole face lit up with a smile that made his chest feel tight. "I hoped you would come by." "I said I would. How are you? Is Mrs. Patterson treating you well?" "She's been wonderful. The work is hard, but I don't mind. It feels good to be useful, to earn my keep." Abigail glanced behind her, then stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door partially closed. "I'm glad you came. I wanted to thank you again properly. You saved my life, Nathan. I know that's not an exaggeration. If you hadn't found me when you did, I don't know what would have happened to me. You would have figured something out. You're stronger than you think. Maybe. But I'm grateful I didn't have to find out." She moved closer, and Nathan was aware of how alone they were on the porch, how easy it would be to reach out and touch her hand, to pull her into his arms. He kept his hands firmly at his sides. "Have you heard anything from your husband?" he asked, though the word husband tasted bitter in his mouth. Abigail's expression darkened. "No, nothing. It's been almost a week now since he left me by that creek, and there's been no word at all. Part of me is relieved, but part of me is angry. How could he just abandon me like that? How could he care so little? I don't know, Abigail. I truly don't. Some men are just broken inside in ways that make them cruel or careless." Nathan leaned against the porch railing, needing something solid to anchor himself. "But his failing isn't your fault. You know that, right?" "Intellectually, yes. But in my heart, I keep wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done differently to make him love me the way I thought he did when we married." "You did nothing wrong. A man who truly loves his wife doesn't hit her or abandon her. That's on him, not you." Nathan's voice was fierce, and Abigail looked up at him with something like wonder in her eyes. "You really believe that?" "Of course I do. It's the truth." They stood there looking at each other, and Nathan felt the air between them grow charged with unspoken feelings. He wanted to tell her that he was falling in love with her, that every moment away from her felt like loss, that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never felt abandoned or unloved again if she would let him. But he could not say any of those things. She was married, and until that changed, she was beyond his reach no matter how much he wanted her. The door opened behind Abigail, and Mrs. Patterson appeared, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with obvious assessment. "Miss Allen, those sheets won't hang themselves. And Nathan, I'm sure you have work to get back to at the ranch." "Yes, madam." Nathan straightened up, touching the brim of his hat. "I just wanted to check on Miss Allen and make sure she was settling in well." "She's settling in just fine. Now both of you back to work." But there was a hint of kindness in Mrs. Patterson's stern voice, and Nathan thought he saw the ghost of a smile on her lips as she ushered Abigail back inside. Nathan rode back to the V-Bar with his thoughts in turmoil. He had hoped that seeing Abigail would ease the ache in his chest, but instead it had only grown stronger. He was in love with her. There was no point denying it to himself any longer. He was deeply, desperately in love with a woman he could not have, and he had no idea what to do about it. The days turned into weeks, and October gave way to November. Nathan found excuses to ride into Madisonville regularly, and each visit with Abigail only deepened his feelings. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from her childhood in Philadelphia to his life on the ranch, from books they had read to dreams they had for the future. She told him about her love of music and how she missed the piano her mother had in their parlor. He told her about his desire to one day have his own small ranch where he could raise horses. They were careful never to be alone together for too long, always aware of Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye and the town's tendency toward gossip. But there were stolen moments, brief touches of hands when no one was looking, lingering glances that said more than words ever could. It was late November when everything changed. Nathan had ridden into town to pick up supplies and visit Abigail as usual when he noticed a commotion near the saloon. A group of men stood in the street, and as Nathan approached, he recognized the man at the center of the group. James Allen had come to Madisonville. Nathan's hands tightened on Copper's reins as he watched James talking loudly to the other men. He was a tall man, well-dressed but with a dissipated look about him, his face flushed red either from drink or anger or both. Nathan dismounted and tied Copper to the hitching post, then moved closer to hear what was being said. "I'm telling you my wife is here in this town," James was saying, his words slightly slurred. "Some cowboy brought her here about 6 weeks ago. I want to know where she is." One of the townsmen, old Mr. Barker, who ran the general store, crossed his arms. "Even if there was such a woman here, which I'm not saying there is, why should we tell you anything? You abandoned your wife in the wilderness from what I hear. That doesn't exactly make you deserving of help. That's my business, not yours. She's my wife, and I have a legal right to her. Now tell me where she is." James's voice rose dangerously. Nathan stepped forward before he could think better of it. "She doesn't want to see you." James spun around, his bloodshot eyes focusing on Nathan with obvious hostility. "And who the hell are you?" "I'm the cowboy who found your wife when you left her to die by Boggy Creek." Nathan's voice was calm but cold. "I'm the one who brought her to town and made sure she had a safe place to stay. And I'm telling you now, she doesn't want to see you, and you're not going to force her." James's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "You've got no right to keep a man from his wife. I don't care who you think you are. I'm not keeping anyone from anyone. I'm saying she has the right to choose whether she wants to see you, and she's made it clear she doesn't." Nathan was aware of the other men watching, of the way several of them had moved to form a loose semicircle around the confrontation. "You're sleeping with her, aren't you?" James's voice was ugly with accusation. "That's why you're protecting her. You want her for yourself." Nathan felt rage surge through him, but he kept his voice level. "I've been a perfect gentleman to your wife, which is more than you can say. Now I suggest you leave Madisonville before this situation gets any worse." "I'm not leaving without my wife." James took a step toward Nathan, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. "That's enough." The new voice was firm and authoritative, and Nathan looked over to see Sheriff Daniels pushing through the crowd. The lawman was in his 40s, a former Texas Ranger who ran Madisonville with a fair but firm hand. "James Allen, I've heard about you. You've been drinking and causing trouble in 3 towns between here and Huntsville, asking after your wife and making threats. I'm going to give you one chance to ride out of here peacefully." "I want my wife," James repeated stubbornly. "Your wife is under the protection of Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house, and Mrs. Patterson has informed me that the lady in question does not wish to see you or return to you. Now, legally, you do have rights as her husband, but morally, you gave up those rights when you abandoned her. I can't stop you from going to the boarding house, but I can and will arrest you if you cause any trouble or threaten anyone. Is that clear?" James looked around at the circle of hostile faces, at Sheriff Daniels with his hand on his gun, at Nathan standing ready to fight if necessary. Whatever he saw there made him reconsider. "This isn't over," he muttered. "She's my wife. I have rights." He staggered away toward where his horse was tied outside the saloon, and the crowd watched until he mounted and rode out of town heading south. Only when he was out of sight did Nathan allow himself to relax slightly. Sheriff Daniels turned to him. "Nathan Vance, right? From the V-Bar?" "Yes, sir." "Walk with me." It was not a request. Nathan followed the sheriff down the street away from the dispersing crowd. When they were alone, Daniels stopped and fixed Nathan with a serious look. "Tell me the whole story. I've heard pieces from Mrs. Patterson and some rumors around town, but I want to hear it from you." Nathan told him everything, from finding Abigail by the creek to bringing her to the boarding house to his regular visits over the past 6 weeks. He left nothing out, knowing that the truth was his only defense. When he finished, Sheriff Daniels was quiet for a long moment. "You're in love with her." It was not a question, but Nathan answered anyway. "Yes, sir, I am." "And she feels the same way about you?" "I think so. We've never spoken of it directly, but yes, I believe she does." "That's a complicated situation, son. She's a married woman, and while I think her husband is scum and I wouldn't blame her for leaving him, the law doesn't care much about my opinion or yours. If James Allen pushes this, he could force her to go back to him, and there wouldn't be much any of us could do about it." Nathan's jaw clenched. "I won't let him hurt her again. I understand how you feel, but you need to be smart about this. If you do something rash, you'll end up in jail or worse, and then you won't be able to help her at all." Daniels put a hand on Nathan's shoulder. "Let me look into some things. There might be legal options we haven't considered. In the meantime, you stay away from James Allen if he comes back, you hear me? Don't give him any excuse to claim you're interfering with his marriage." "Yes, sir. I understand." But Nathan knew that if it came down to a choice between following the law and protecting Abigail, he would choose Abigail every time. Consequences be damned. He went to the boarding house after his conversation with the sheriff, finding Abigail in the kitchen helping Mrs. Patterson prepare dinner. The widow took one look at his face and shooed Abigail out to the porch to talk with him. "James was here," Nathan said without preamble. "In town. He came looking for you." All the color drained from Abigail's face. "Is he still here?" "No." "Sheriff Daniels sent him away, but Abigail, he knows you're here now. He knows which town you're in. He might come back." She sat down heavily on the porch step, her hands trembling. "I can't go back to him, Nathan, I can't. I would rather die." "You're not going to die, and you're not going back to him." Nathan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Sheriff Daniels is looking into legal options. There might be a way to end your marriage based on abandonment or cruelty. Divorce." Abigail's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you know what that would make me? A divorced woman is ruined, Nathan. No decent person would associate with me. I would. I'll always stand by you no matter what." He took her hand, no longer caring who might see. "Abigail, I know the timing is terrible and the situation is impossible, but I need you to know how I feel. I'm in love with you. I have been almost since the moment I found you by that creek. I love you, and I want to be with you, and I'll fight for you against James Allen or the law or anyone else who tries to keep us apart." Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks, but she was smiling even as she cried. "I love you too. I've been so afraid to say it, so afraid to even think it because I'm married and it's wrong, but I do, Nathan. I love you so much." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she cried against his chest. It was not the romantic declaration he had sometimes imagined, but it was real and true, and that mattered more than poetry or pretty words. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I think you two better come inside. We need to talk about what happens next, and we need to be practical about it." They followed her into the parlor, and Nathan was surprised to see Sheriff Daniels already there, sitting in one of the chairs with his hat on his knee. The lawman looked up as they entered. "I've been talking with Mrs. Patterson about your situation," Daniels said to Abigail. "There are a few options we can explore. First, you could file for divorce based on abandonment and cruelty. It would be difficult and it would take time, but it's possible. Second, we could try to find out if James Allen has committed any crimes that would land him in jail, which would effectively separate you from him even if you stayed legally married. Third, you could leave Texas entirely and start over somewhere he can't find you." "I don't want to run," Abigail said, her voice stronger than Nathan had ever heard it. "I'm tired of being afraid. I want to stay here in Madisonville where I have friends and work and a life. I want to file for divorce." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "That's a brave choice, dear. It won't be easy and there will be talk, but I think it's the right one." "I'll need to go to the county seat to file the papers," Abigail continued, "and I'll need money for a lawyer. I don't have anything." "I'll pay for it," Nathan said immediately. "I've got savings." "Not a lot, but enough for a lawyer and whatever else you need." "Nathan, I can't let you do that." "You're not letting me, I'm choosing to do it." He looked at Sheriff Daniels. "Is that legal? Can I help her with the costs? It's your money, son. You can spend it on whatever you like. Though I will say, when this gets to court, the judge is going to take a dim view of you two being involved while she's still legally married. It might hurt her case." Daniels's voice was gentle but firm. Nathan felt his heart sink. "You're saying we can't see each other?" "I'm saying you need to be careful about appearances. No more private meetings, no public displays of affection, nothing that James Allen's lawyer could use to claim that Abigail was unfaithful during the marriage." "But I wasn't," Abigail protested. "We've never done anything inappropriate." "Nathan has been nothing but respectful." "I believe you, but a lawyer could twist things to make it look different. They could claim that you left your husband for another man, which would give James grounds to contest the divorce and possibly even sue Nathan for alienation of affection." Daniels stood up. "I'm not trying to keep you two apart permanently, but for now, while this legal process is happening, you need to maintain a proper distance. Can you do that?" Nathan looked at Abigail, seeing his own pain reflected in her eyes. They had only just confessed their love for each other, and now they were being told they had to stay apart. It felt cruel and unfair, but he understood the necessity. "We can do it," he said finally. "However long it takes, we can do it." Abigail nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes. We can be patient if it means we can be together eventually." The next few months were the hardest of Nathan's life. He stayed away from Madisonville except when ranch business absolutely required it, and even then he avoided the boarding house. He threw himself into his work, taking on extra shifts and volunteering for every difficult job Mr. Vernon needed done. Anything to keep his mind occupied and his heart from breaking. He heard news through the ranch hands who went to town more frequently. Abigail had indeed filed for divorce, and James Allen had contested it as expected. There would be a hearing in the spring at the county seat, and until then, everything was in a state of limbo. James had been seen around Madisonville a few times, always drunk and always bitter, making threats and accusations that no one took seriously, but that kept tensions high. Winter came to Texas, bringing cold winds and occasional frost. The work on the ranch slowed somewhat with the season, giving Nathan too much time to think. He missed Abigail with an ache that never fully went away, and he lay awake at night imagining what it would be like when they could finally be together openly, without fear or shame. Christmas came and went. A somber affair in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands sharing stories and drinking whiskey to ward off the cold. Nathan thought about Abigail spending Christmas at the boarding house, and he hoped Mrs. Patterson and the other boarders were being kind to her. He had wanted to send her a gift, but Sheriff Daniels had advised against it, saying that any evidence of their continued relationship could be used against her in court. It was mid-January when everything came to a head. Nathan was in the barn mending tack when one of the younger ranch hands, a boy named Billy, came running in with news. "Nathan, there's trouble in town. Sheriff sent word for any available men to come help." Nathan dropped the leather he was working on and grabbed his gun belt. "What kind of trouble?" James Allen came back, and he's drunk and armed and demanding to see his wife. "Sheriff is trying to talk him down, but he's threatening to start shooting if someone doesn't bring Abigail out to him." Nathan was running before Billy finished speaking, not bothering to saddle Copper but simply leaping onto the horse's back and galloping toward town. The 10 miles passed in a blur, and he urged Copper faster than was probably safe, but all he could think about was Abigail in danger. He reached Madisonville to find a tense scene in the street outside the boarding house. James Allen stood in the middle of the road, swaying slightly, with a pistol in his hand. Sheriff Daniels was positioned behind a water trough, trying to negotiate, and several other townsmen had taken cover in various positions with their own weapons drawn. Mrs. Patterson stood on the porch of the boarding house, and Nathan's heart nearly stopped when he saw Abigail beside her. "Get inside," he shouted as he pulled Copper to a stop and dismounted. "Abigail, get inside now." James spun toward Nathan's voice, his red-rimmed eyes focusing with difficulty. "There he is. There's the bastard who stole my wife. You want her so bad. Come and get her." He raised his pistol, pointing it not at Nathan but at Abigail on the porch. Everything seemed to happen at once. Nathan drew his own gun and fired, aiming for James's hand but hitting his shoulder instead. James jerked back from the impact, his shot going wild and hitting the porch post next to Abigail's head. She screamed and dropped to the ground, and Mrs. Patterson threw herself over her protectively. Sheriff Daniels rushed forward and kicked the gun away from James's hand, then forced the wounded man to the ground and into restraints. Nathan ran to the porch, taking the steps 3 at a time. "Abigail, are you hurt?" She looked up at him from where she crouched under Mrs. Patterson's protective arm, her face white with shock but her eyes clear. "I'm all right. He didn't hit me." Nathan wanted to pull her into his arms, to hold her and never let go, but he was aware of all the eyes on them, all the witnesses who would be called to testify in court. He stayed a careful foot away, his hands clenched at his sides. Sheriff Daniels hauled James to his feet, the man groaning from the bullet wound in his shoulder. "James Allen, you're under arrest for attempted murder and drunk and disorderly conduct. You'll be sitting in my jail until the circuit judge comes through next month, and I suspect you'll be seeing the inside of a state prison after that." "She's my wife," James muttered, still fixated on that single idea even as blood seeped through his shirt. "My wife." "Not anymore," Sheriff Daniels said grimly. "You just gave her all the evidence she needs for a divorce based on cruelty and attempted murder. No judge in Texas is going to force a woman to stay married to a man who tried to kill her. You're done, Allen. You lost." They took James away, the town doctor following to tend to his wound before he was locked up. The crowd began to disperse, and Mrs. Patterson finally released Abigail and stood up, brushing off her skirts. "Well," the widow said with remarkable calm considering what had just happened, "that was exciting. "Abigail, dear, I think you should go inside and have some tea. You're shaking." "I'm all right," Abigail said, but her voice was unsteady. She looked at Nathan, and the longing in her eyes mirrored what he felt in his own heart. "Thank you for coming. You might have saved my life." "I always will," Nathan said softly. "Always, Abigail." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat meaningfully. "Inside, Abigail, now." "And Nathan, I think you should go talk to Sheriff Daniels about what happens next. Though between you and me, I suspect that hearing in the spring just became a lot less necessary." She was right. Within a week, Abigail's lawyer had filed new papers with the court based on James's attempted murder. James himself, recovering from his gunshot wound in the county jail, did not contest them. Perhaps he finally understood that he had lost, or perhaps he simply did not have the will to fight anymore. Either way, by early February, the divorce was granted. Abigail Allen became Abigail Adams again, taking back her maiden name and her freedom. The scandal was immense, of course. Divorced women were rare in Texas in 1873, and the gossips had a field day with speculation about her relationship with Nathan and what might have happened between them. But Mrs. Patterson stood firmly by her, and enough of the townspeople had witnessed James's drunken rampage that public opinion eventually swung in Abigail's favor. Nathan waited 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized before he rode into Madisonville to call on Abigail properly. He wore his best shirt and pants, the ones he usually reserved for church, and he had bathed and shaved carefully that morning. His hands were sweating as he knocked on the boarding house door, and when Abigail answered, his breath caught just as it always did when he saw her. She was wearing a new dress, a soft blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and her dark hair was arranged in a way that made her look older and more sophisticated. But when she smiled at him, it was the same smile he had fallen in love with by the creek all those months ago, warm and genuine and full of light. "Nathan," she said, and his name on her lips sounded like music. "I was hoping you would come by." "I wanted to give you time," he said, turning his hat nervously in his hands. "Time to adjust and figure out what you want, but I can't stay away any longer, Abigail. I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too. Would you like to come in? Mrs. Patterson has given us permission to sit in the parlor." They sat together on the settee, properly distant but close enough that Nathan could smell the lavender soap she used. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both overwhelmed by the reality that they could finally be together without fear or guilt or legal complications. "I don't want to rush you," Nathan said finally. "I know you've been through so much this past year, and you need time to heal and find yourself again. But I need you to know that my feelings haven't changed. I love you, Abigail. I want to marry you and spend my life with you if you'll have me. Not right away, not until you're ready, but someday. I want that someday with you." Abigail's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I want that too, Nathan. I want it more than anything, and I don't need as much time as you might think. I've had months to think about what I want, months to heal and grow stronger. I know my own mind now in a way I never did before, and I know that I love you and I want to build a life with you." "Really? You're sure?" Nathan hardly dared to believe it. "I'm sure. But I do think we should wait a little while before we marry for propriety's sake. Maybe 6 months. That will give people time to stop gossiping quite so much, and it will give us time to court properly, the way we never got to before." 6 months, Nathan repeated, committing it to memory. "I can wait 6 months if it means I get to spend the rest of my life with you." He took her hand then, lifting it to his lips and kissing her knuckles gently. Abigail shivered at the touch, and Nathan saw desire and love mixed together in her expression. They had been patient for so long, denying their feelings and maintaining propriety even when every instinct told them to give in to what they felt. 6 more months seemed like both an eternity and a gift, time to build their relationship on a foundation that was solid and unshakable. The next 6 months passed in a blur of happiness. Nathan courted Abigail properly, calling on her 3 times a week at the boarding house, taking her to church socials and town dances, walking with her through Madisonville on Sunday afternoons. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and preferences, discovering the 1,000 small things that made up a life together. Nathan told her about his dreams of having his own ranch someday, a small place where he could breed and train horses. Abigail told him about her love of music and her hope to one day have a piano again. They made plans and dreamed together, weaving their separate futures into one shared vision. In April, Nathan went to Mr. Vernon and asked for advice about buying land. The older man listened carefully, then made Nathan an offer that left him speechless. Mr. Vernon had been planning to retire in a few years, and he had a piece of property on the far edge of the V-Bar that he was willing to sell to Nathan at a favorable price, with payments spread over several years. It was 200 acres with a creek running through it, good grazing land and a small house that needed some repairs but was structurally sound. "You've been loyal to me for 9 years, Nathan," Mr. Vernon said. "You've worked hard and never complained and always done more than what was asked. I'd like to see you get started with your own place, and I can't think of anyone I would rather have as a neighbor. What do you say?" Nathan said yes, of course, his voice rough with emotion. He shook Mr. Vernon's hand and rode immediately to tell Abigail the news. They would have a home, a real home of their own, a place to start their life together. The wedding was set for August, exactly 1 year after Nathan had found Abigail by the creek. It seemed fitting somehow, a way of marking how far they had come and how much they had overcome. The ceremony would be small, held in Madisonville's little white church, with Reverend Morris officiating and Mrs. Patterson standing as Abigail's witness. As the date approached, Nathan felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that kept him awake at night. He was 25 years old and had never been married, had never even courted a woman seriously before Abigail. What if he was not good enough for her? What if he could not make her happy? What if she regretted choosing him? "You're worrying too much," Mr. Vernon told him one evening when he caught Nathan staring off into space instead of eating his supper. "That woman loves you, son. Anyone with eyes can see it. You're going to make each other very happy." "I hope so. I just want to be worthy of her." "None of us are worthy of the love we're given. That's what makes it grace. You just do your best to love her back with everything you have, and that will be enough." The older man clapped Nathan on the shoulder. "Now eat your food before it gets cold. You need your strength for all the work we need to do on that house before your bride moves in." The week before the wedding, Nathan and several of the other ranch hands worked dawn to dusk, repairing and cleaning the little house that would be his and Abigail's home. They patched the roof and fixed the broken windows, whitewashed the walls and scrubbed the floors until they shone. Mr. Vernon's wife donated some furniture, and Mrs. Patterson contributed dishes and linens. By the time they were done, the house looked like a real home, simple but comfortable and filled with promise. On the morning of his wedding day, Nathan woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep. He bathed and dressed carefully in the new suit he had bought for the occasion, dark blue wool that had cost him nearly a month's wages, but was worth it to look his best for Abigail. His hands shook as he tied his tie, and he had to try 3 times before he got it right. The church was full when he arrived, more people than he had expected. It seemed half the town had turned out to witness the wedding, curiosity and genuine well-wishes mixed together. Nathan stood at the front of the church next to Reverend Morris, his palms sweating and his heart pounding. Then the door opened, and Abigail walked in, and Nathan forgot to breathe. She wore a dress of pale ivory silk that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her dark hair was arranged in curls pinned up with small white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that the ranch hands' wives had gathered for her. She looked like an angel, like a dream, like everything Nathan had ever wanted and never thought he would have. Their eyes met across the church, and Abigail smiled, that same radiant smile that had captured his heart so many months ago. Nathan smiled back, and suddenly he was not nervous anymore. This was right. This was meant to be. Everything they had gone through, all the pain and fear and waiting, had led them to this moment. Abigail reached the front of the church, and Nathan took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. Reverend Morris began the ceremony, his voice solemn and warm, speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Nathan barely heard the words. All his attention was focused on Abigail, on the joy in her eyes and the tears running down her cheeks, and the way her hand trembled slightly in his. "Do you, Nathan Christopher Vance, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Nathan said, his voice strong and clear. "I absolutely do." "And do you, Abigail Marie Adams, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Abigail whispered, then louder, "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Texas and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you may kiss your bride." Nathan had been waiting for this moment for a year, and he did not waste it. He cupped Abigail's face gently in his hands and kissed her, pouring all his love and devotion and gratitude into that single kiss. Abigail kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, and the church erupted in applause and cheers around them. They were married. Finally, officially, completely married. Nathan Vance and Abigail Vance, husband and wife, partners for life. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Patterson providing a feast that must have taken her days to prepare. There was roast beef and chicken, potatoes and vegetables, fresh bread and butter, and a beautiful cake decorated with white icing and sugar flowers. People ate and drank and danced in the parlor and on the porch, celebrating long into the evening. Nathan danced with his bride, holding her close and marveling at the fact that he could do this now, could touch her and hold her and kiss her without guilt or restraint. She was his wife, his partner, his love, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted choosing him. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and rode out to their new home, Nathan on Copper and Abigail on a gentle mare that Mr. Vernon had given them as a wedding present. The little house looked welcoming in the golden evening light, smoke rising from the chimney where Mr. Vernon had started a fire for them earlier in the day. Nathan dismounted and helped Abigail down, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "I'm carrying you over the threshold," he announced. "It's tradition." Abigail laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I didn't know you cared about tradition. I care about starting our marriage right." He carried her through the door and into their home, setting her down gently in the middle of the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance." "Home," Abigail repeated softly, looking around at the simple furniture and clean walls and the fire crackling in the hearth. "I never thought I would have a real home again after everything that happened, but this is perfect, Nathan. This is everything I ever wanted." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close and breathing in the scent of her hair. "I love you, Abigail. I'm going to spend every day of my life making you happy. You already make me happy just by being you, just by loving me the way you do." She looked up at him, and the desire in her eyes made his pulse quicken. "We're alone now. Finally, truly alone. No more waiting, no more propriety. Just you and me." Nathan kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Abigail responded with a passion that matched his own. They had waited so long, denied themselves for months out of respect for the law and society's expectations. But now there were no more barriers between them, nothing to keep them apart. He lifted her again and carried her to the bedroom, to the bed covered with the quilt Mrs. Patterson had given them as a wedding present. And there, in the privacy of their own home with the Texas night settling soft around them, Nathan and Abigail finally consummated their marriage, their love, their commitment to each other. It was tender and passionate and perfect, everything a wedding night should be, and when they finally lay exhausted and sated in each other's arms, Nathan knew that he was the luckiest man alive. "I love you," Abigail whispered against his chest. "Thank you for finding me by that creek. Thank you for not looking away. Thank you for building that fire and giving me your blanket and bringing me somewhere safe. Thank you for loving me when I did not think I deserved to be loved." "You've always deserved to be loved," Nathan said, kissing the top of her head. "And I will love you until the day I die and beyond." They fell asleep tangled together, and Nathan dreamed of the future they would build, the children they would have, the life they would make on this small piece of Texas land. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple joys. Nathan built up his horse breeding business slowly but steadily, developing a reputation for quality animals and fair dealing. Abigail managed their home with efficiency and grace, and she finally got her piano, a second-hand upright that Nathan bought her for their first anniversary. The sound of her playing drifted across the ranch in the evenings, and Nathan never grew tired of hearing it. They had their first child in the spring of 1875, a boy they named Christopher after Nathan's father. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn determination, and Nathan fell in love with him the moment the midwife placed him in his arms. Watching Abigail with their son, seeing her glow with joy and love, Nathan was reminded again of how close he had come to losing her, how different their lives would be if he had not happened to ride past that creek on that October day. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Mary, and then another boy they called William. The little house that had seemed so spacious with just 2 people suddenly felt cramped and busy, full of the noise and chaos of children. Nathan added on 2 more rooms, working in the evenings and on Sundays to expand their home to accommodate their growing family. Mr. Vernon retired in 1878, selling the V-Bar Ranch to a cattle company from Dallas, but keeping a small house in Madisonville, where he and his wife could live out their remaining years in comfort. He remained a close friend and mentor to Nathan, often riding out to the Vance ranch to check on the horses and offer advice when asked. Mrs. Patterson continued to run her boarding house with the same stern efficiency, and she doted on Nathan and Abigail's children, declaring herself their honorary grandmother since Abigail's real parents had passed away without ever meeting their grandchildren, having died during a yellow fever outbreak in Philadelphia in 1876. It was a source of deep sadness for Abigail that her parents had died before she could reconcile with them and show them that she had found happiness after all. but she honored their memory by being the best mother she could be to her own children. Sheriff Daniels remained the law in Madisonville until 1882, when he retired and moved to San Antonio to live with his daughter. He and Nathan had become good friends over the years, and the former lawman often told the story of how Nathan had shot James Allen to protect Abigail, always emphasizing Nathan's bravery and quick thinking. James himself had served 5 years in prison for attempted murder before being released and disappearing. No one in Madisonville ever heard from him again, and that was fine with everyone. The years flowed by, each one bringing its own challenges and rewards. There were droughts and storms, good years for horses and bad years for cattle, births and deaths and all the small dramas that made up life in a small Texas town. Through it all, Nathan and Abigail remained devoted to each other, their love growing deeper and richer with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary in August 1884, Nathan took Abigail back to Boggy Creek where he had found her all those years ago. The cottonwood trees were still there, older and larger, and the creek still flowed cool and clear over the smooth rocks. They stood together on the bank, holding hands and remembering. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much my life changed that day," Abigail said softly. "I was so lost and frightened and alone. I thought my life was over, and then you appeared and everything changed." "I'm the one who should be grateful," Nathan replied. "You gave me a family, a home, a reason to build something instead of just working for someone else. You gave me love and purpose and 3 beautiful children. You gave me everything, Abigail." She smiled up at him, and he could still see traces of the young woman she had been, vulnerable and brave in equal measure. But now there was also the confidence of a woman who had survived hardship and built a good life through determination and faith. "We gave each other everything," she corrected. "That's what love is, I think. Not one person saving another, but 2 people choosing each other and building something together." Nathan kissed her there by the creek where their story had begun, and he thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a single moment of compassion and decency could change the course of 2 lives forever. He had looked away when he found her wringing water from her only dress, respecting her dignity when she was at her most vulnerable. He had built a fire to warm her when she was cold and alone. Such simple acts, such small kindnesses, but they had led to this, to a decade of marriage and a lifetime of love still stretching ahead of them. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, then rode back to their ranch where their children were waiting with Mrs. Patterson, who had agreed to watch them for the evening. Christopher, now 9 years old and already showing signs of becoming as good with horses as his father, wanted to know every detail of their ride. Mary, 7 and musical like her mother, had practiced a new song on the piano to play for them. William, 5 and full of mischief, had somehow managed to get mud all over himself despite Mrs. Patterson's best efforts at supervision. Nathan and Abigail gathered their children close, listening to Mary's song and cleaning William's face and answering Christopher's questions. This was their life, chaotic and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. This was what Nathan had worked for, what he had waited for, what he would have fought armies to protect. That night, after the children were in bed and Mrs. Patterson had gone home, Nathan and Abigail sat together on their porch, watching the stars come out over the Texas sky. The night was warm but pleasant, with a breeze carrying the scent of grass and horses and home. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked quietly. "Giving up your life in Philadelphia, going through everything with James, all the hardship and struggle?" Abigail was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I regret the pain and fear," she said finally. I regret the time I wasted with a man who did not value me. But I don't regret the path that led me to you. Everything I went through made me who I am now, and I like who I am now. I'm strong in ways I never could have been if I had stayed safe in Philadelphia. I'm capable and confident and sure of my own mind. And I'm loved by a good man who would never hurt me, who would never abandon me, who built me a fire when I was cold and looked away to preserve my dignity when I was vulnerable. She leaned against him, and Nathan wrapped his arm around her shoulders. I love you, Nathan Vance. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Abigail Vance. Always have, always will. They sat there in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through patience and faith and unwavering commitment. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over them that first night by Boggy Creek, and Nathan sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the day he had ridden past that particular place at that particular time, and found a woman wringing water from her only dress. The years continued to pass, bringing more children, a fourth son named Thomas born in 1886 and a second daughter named Elizabeth born in 1889. The Vance Ranch prospered, becoming known throughout Texas for the quality of its horses. Christopher grew up to work alongside his father, sharing his passion for breeding and training. Mary became a music teacher in Madisonville, bringing culture and beauty to the rough frontier town. William eventually became a sheriff like the man he had been named after, upholding the law with fairness and courage. Thomas took to ranching naturally, while Elizabeth, the baby of the family, grew up to be a writer who documented the history of Texas and the stories of the people who had settled there. Nathan and Abigail watched their children grow and flourish, taking pride in each of their accomplishments and supporting them through their struggles. They became grandparents in 1895 when Christopher married a sweet girl named Sarah and had twin boys the following year. More grandchildren followed as their other children married and started families of their own. Through it all, Nathan and Abigail remained each other's anchor and compass. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered illnesses and financial difficulties, mourned the deaths of friends like Mr. Vernon and Mrs. Patterson, and rejoiced in the births of grandchildren and the successes of their children. Their love never wavered, never dimmed, never became routine or taken for granted. In the autumn of 1923, 50 years after Nathan had found Abigail by Boggy Creek, they celebrated their golden wedding anniversary with a party that brought family and friends from all across Texas. Their children and grandchildren filled the ranch house that had been expanded and remodeled many times over the years, and everyone took turns sharing stories and memories. Nathan, now 74 years old with white hair and weathered skin but still strong and capable, stood up to give a toast. Abigail sat beside him, 73 and beautiful to him as she had been on the day they married. Her dark hair now silver, but her eyes still bright with intelligence and love. 50 years ago, Nathan said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, I was tracking some horse thieves through the wilderness, and I stumbled across a woman in distress. I could have ridden past. I could have told myself it was not my business. But something made me stop, made me help, made me look away to preserve her dignity and build a fire to keep her warm. That decision, that moment of simple human decency, gave me everything good in my life. It gave me this woman, my wife, my partner, my love. It gave me 5 wonderful children and 14 grandchildren and counting. It gave me a home and a purpose and 50 years of happiness I never could have imagined. He looked down at Abigail, and she smiled up at him with tears in her eyes. You saved me that day, Abigail. You gave me a reason to be better than I was, to work harder, to love deeper, to build something lasting. You made me the man I am, and I thank God every day for leading me to that creek at exactly the right moment to find you." Abigail stood and took his hand, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. Their children and grandchildren crowded around, hugging them and wiping away tears of joy. It was a perfect moment, a culmination of 50 years of love and devotion and partnership. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Nathan and Abigail lay together in the bed they had shared for half a century. Nathan's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest, exactly as they had lain on their wedding night all those years ago. "I would do it all again," Abigail whispered. "Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear or pain, I would do it all again to end up here with you." "So would I," Nathan agreed. "Every single moment." They drifted off to sleep together, peaceful and content, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, the love they had nurtured, the family they had raised. Outside, the Texas night settled soft around their ranch, the same land Nathan had bought 50 years ago to make a home for his bride. The horses shifted and snorted in their stalls, the cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere an owl called out to its mate. Nathan Vance died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1928, at the age of 79, with Abigail holding his hand. She followed him exactly 1 year later, as though she had been waiting just long enough to make sure their affairs were in order, and their children would be all right before going to join him. They were buried side by side in the Madisonville Cemetery under a shared headstone that reads simply, "Nathan and Abigail Vance, beloved husband and wife, together forever." Their children divided the ranch among themselves, each taking a portion to work and pass down to their own children. The Vance name became synonymous with quality horses and honest dealing throughout Texas, a legacy that continued for generations. And sometimes, on quiet autumn evenings, family members would ride out to Boggy Creek and stand by the cottonwood trees, remembering the story of how their family had begun. How a cowboy had found a woman wringing water from her only dress, had looked away to preserve her dignity, and had built a fire to keep her warm. It was a simple story of kindness and compassion, but it had become their family's foundation. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary lives begin with the simplest acts of human decency and love.